was returning home telling my son stories about airplanes. And these stories about airplanes fascinated him.
And just like that, a new series was born. Greetings everyone, this is Bonnie with
Sakura the Diesel.
And we're the Review Bros. Welcome to another Every Episode Reviewed series, where today we're going to be reviewing something completely different.
Yep, that's right. As you can tell by the title and the intro, we're not going to be reviewing Thomas this time. We still want to take a break before we're ready to continue with the hit era. So for now, Barney suggested that we take a look at another show that we both grew up with. However, unlike Thomas, it's been years since I've seen anything related to today's review. Today, we are going to take a look at JJ the Jet Plane.
Now you may be asking, okay, why did the planes look so different? Well, that's because we're not actually going to take a look at the series most people are familiar with just yet. That'll come later. Instead, we're going to be starting with a chapter in the JJ catalog that most people didn't know existed, and that is the model era of JJ the Jet Plane. I know, you're most likely very confused at this point, but don't worry, we'll talk about the history of the model era right now for the ones that are unfamiliar with it.
So by the mid-1990s, Thomas the Tank Engine had been set in stone for American audience. The amount of merchandise the show received was huge. You couldn't escape it. There were Ertl diecast, wooden railway toys, posters, VHS tapes containing episodes from the first 3 seasons, books, towels, you name it. Thomas was a big success in the United States. While all that was going on, a pastor at the Methodist Church in Dallas, Texas named David Wait a minute. There we go. David Mitchell thought that he could do a show about talking airplanes using Thomas as an inspiration. The way JJ and his pals came about started when David had to travel across the country recruiting doctors for his hospital job. After coming back from those trips and quitting his job, David started telling his son, John Michael, stories about airplanes, and those stories really fascinated John. So much so that David decided to try his hand at making his own TV show featuring talking airplanes. And thus, after finding the right team at a production company called AMS Productions on this new series, originally titled The Adventures of JJ the Jet Plane and His Flying Friends, began production in June of 1994. In total, the team produced 3 direct-to-video VHS tapes containing 4 episodes each, bringing a total of episodes to 12.
And that's what we're going to be taking a look at today.
And much like what we've been doing with Thomas, we're going to review every episode of JJ, what we like, didn't like, and give each episode our own personal ratings. And then we'll be giving the overall show our final rating.
With all that said, let's dive in and review all 12 episodes from the model era of JJ the Jet Plane. Episode 1, JJs First Flight. We meet a brown little plane called JJ who's looking forward to flying for the first time. Wait, brown? Isn't he supposed to be blue? Well, there's a little story behind that. You see, when the first VHS tape began production in 1994, JJ was painted blue from the very beginning. But when they started filming his debut episode, the team encountered a big problem behind the scenes. At the time the series was being pitched, the crew only had a blue screen at their possession, and unfortunately, whenever they inserted JJ into the scene, he would disappear from the frame of the camera. So temporarily, the team decided to paint JJ brown while they could afford a green screen. But don't worry, because he won't have that brown color for very long. Anyways, this was a good episode to start off the model era and JJ in general. It's got a simple story and a simple action going on. In this case being that JJ is too excited to fly for the first time, but due to his excitement levels being over 110, he messes up his first flight. While this is not one of my favorite episodes from the model era, I can say that this episode did a good job in introducing us to the main character of the show and also the wise airplane of the series, Big Jake. So with that, I'm giving JJ's First Flight a good episode rating.
I agree, this is a good start off for JJ, both as a show and for JJ himself as a character. You can see some inspirations for Thomas in this episode because JJ is a little like Thomas, in that he gets excited and he's very playful. But unlike Thomas, JJ is not cheeky, and Big Jake is kind of like Gordon in that he's been in the airport for long enough that he knows how things go, but he's not grumpy or stuck up. He does care for the young planes as shown in the end of the episode where he understands JJ and even offers to tell him the mistakes he's made when he first started off. That's actually a nice touch they did for this episode. We'll talk more about the sets later, but the sets in the show overall are alright. Dated, yeah, but it's not all that bad, and I'll admit, it will take some time to get used to the models, mostly JJ, but again, once you do get used to them, it's not all that bad. Anyway, for the first episode, I'll give it a 7 out of 10 for a good episode. Episode 2, Tracy's Fantastic Journey. Tracy dreams about, stuff. Nah, this episode was alright. Yeah, the little summary I wrote, that's basically the episode in a nutshell. Visually, the episode was nice, especially the dream sequence. Has some good animation, and it was creative, but it does feel like it dragged the episode on a little too long at some parts. I do like the dynamic between Savannah and Tracy. I wish it was shown a little more, because there's a lot of good story you can do with these two, but it just ends up being a waste. Again, more on that later, but yeah, the episode is fine, but not all that wonderful. I'll give it a 6 out of 10 for a light good episode.
Fantastic? Nope. This is not a fantastic episode. It's a boring one. My god, that dream sequence dragged out for way longer than it needed to. And while yes, I agree that it had some nice visuals, it unfortunately didn't save the episode from being a boring one. I also do agree with Sequoia that the character dynamic between Tracy and Savannah was good, but I certainly would have liked to see them both paired in a better episode than this. So yep, unfortunately, this is our first weak episode of the model era. I will admit, I am not a big fan of Tracy's episodes, and you're gonna start to notice that when we get to the next two, but more of them later. Let's move on to the next episode. Episode 3, Herkys' Bright Idea. After JJ gets lost in a thick fog, Herky comes up with a plan to find him. For this episode having Herky's name in the title, Herky doesn't even appear until the very end of the episode. Kind of a misleading title if you think about it. Anyway, I love this episode. It was nice seeing JJ face his fear of the dark, and not gonna lie, I thought the idea Herky came up with, which was absorbing the lightning bugs into him, was kinda strange the first time I watched the episode. But now I agree that the idea was bright after all. So with that, Herky's Bright Idea is definitely gonna get the bright light of a good episode.
Yes, I agree. This episode was very good. And yeah, I'm with Bonnie in that the title is a little misleading in that it's more of an episode about JJ than Herky. In fact, when I first saw the episode, I thought I was watching the wrong one until he finally showed up in the end. And even then, the episode was still focused more on JJ. Anyway, the episode was pretty well written, and the sets looked good in this episode. I liked the nighttime scene, and I also loved the detail the writers did with the fireflies. Though, I'll admit, I was at a loss for words when I first saw that scene, but yeah, it was still pretty clever with how the fireflies were being used. So yep, I would go as far as to say that this is one of my favorite episodes in the model series. So, I'll give it a 9 out of 10 for a great episode. Episode 4, Old Oscar Steals the Show. An air show is being shown in the airfield, and Oscar is determined to participate in it. So yeah, this episode made me realize that JJ is going to be more of an entertainment show than a sort of realistic show. But hey, entertainment is not a bad thing, and this episode does a good job with the entertainment value. They show off some cool stunts, and they're somewhat cool effects and editings, but I can see kids being entertained with the premise. Oscar really does steal the show in this episode with his stubbornness, but also showing off his fun side. I don't have too much to say. It's fun, and it does what the episode sounds like. It's just planes doing stunts. It was fun enough for me to give it a 7 out of 10 for a good episode.
I love this episode. All of the stunts that the planes did in this episode are really fun. I can imagine the crew members behind the scenes having a blast while filming those scenes. But honestly, Oscar's stunt was definitely the highlight of the episode, and to this day, that scene never ceases to impress me. Also, the stunt JJ and Big J did. What even is this? Anyway, I don't have too much else to say, so I'm gonna skydive and give this episode a good episode rating. Episode 5, JJ's Colorful Cover Up. After flying away without permission to touch a rainbow, JJ is hit by a hailstorm and later is accidentally painted blue. So remember back at the beginning of the review that I said that JJ wouldn't keep his brown color for too long? Well, this is the episode where he's finally painted back into his original color, and wow did the episode did it very well. Instead of having JJ be painted blue already for no reason in particular other than just, well, that, the episode made it very clear that there is a good reason as to why JJ sort of earned that blue color to begin with. I'm glad that the writers did not go the stupid route, because god, I would have disliked this episode if JJ got his blue color just because he passed over the rainbow. Thankfully, instead, we get a nice moral-centric episode about always telling the truth even if you know you're gonna be in trouble for it. So yeah, I have nothing else to say other than the fact that I love this episode, and I'm gonna go ahead and give it a nice, fresh, good episode rating.
Bonnie pretty much stated everything I wanted to say. Yeah, after seeing the last 2 episodes, I was just waiting for them to pull something like what Bonnie mentioned about JJ flying into the rainbow, and that's how he got his blue color. But they actually managed to work out a very good story with how he got his blue color. and a very clever way in teaching kids that they better tell the truth because even if it gets them into trouble, they'll be in a much bigger trouble if they try to cover up their mistakes. It caught me off guard enough that I was impressed with how they managed to work in JJ getting this new color. So I have to give credit where credit is due and give this story a 10 out of 10 for a very well written and very great episode. Episode 6, Old Oscar Leads the Parade. A little girl wins the contest and wants to fly around the sky with Oscar. You know, the more I watch this episode, the more it's starting to grow on me. I feel this is a very sweet and mature episode. Cheesy, sure, but even so, this episode is just relaxing, and it does show you that it's okay to take a breather and enjoy life while you still can. Take some time to go for a walk or just do something that makes you happy. The visuals for this episode are really good, and the song is not too bad. Again, cheesy, sure, but it's still decent at what this episode is trying to say. I do feel the scene where the planes are wondering who the girl's going to choose could have been trimmed down a little bit, but even then, it's not enough to ruin the episode for me. I'm giving this nice and mature episode a 9 out of 10 for another great one.
While I do agree that the scene of Jennifer trying to choose a plane dragged on for a bit too long and that it should have been trimmed down, the rest of the episode is just absolutely fantastic. Like Big Jake said, sometimes we do take our lives for granted, so much so that we end up almost ignoring our surroundings, and honestly, I can relate to that. Also, this episode has one funny line from JJ when he's confused about the parade that old Oscar is talking about, and that always gets a laugh out of me. The song in the episode was absolutely beautiful, and I don't think it's either cheesy or silly. Anyway, I don't have anything else to say, so with that, old Oscar leads this parade into a good episode territory. Episode 7, Snuffy's Birthday Surprise. Snuffy thinks his friends have forgotten his birthday, but cheers up after writing messages for different occasions all over the region. This is a birthday surprise episode done right. If you guys don't know, I hate birthday surprise episodes. They usually make me cringe because it's almost literally the same thing every time. Main character decides to throw a surprise party for the birthday character and orders the other characters to keep the surprise a surprise. The other characters don't wish the birthday character a happy birthday and just pretend it's a regular day, making the birthday character feel downhearted. Birthday character gets upset that the other characters have forgotten their birthday and feels sad about it. Main character and the others finally surprise the birthday character after a while, and that's it. It's so gosh darn repetitive and predictable that you know what's gonna happen before the episode is even over. But surprisingly, this episode did it very well. Sure, Snuffy is sad that everyone has forgotten his birthday, but at least it only lasts briefly and doesn't go on for too long unlike other birthday surprise episodes I've seen. I love that Snuffy actually managed to enjoy his birthday, even if he thought his friends had forgotten. And I will admit, the little surprise at the very end was very touching. So with that, I can safely say that Snuffy's birthday surprise has the honor of being one of the very few birthday surprise episodes that I can call a really good episode.
I completely agree. This episode was very sweet. The storytelling was very heartwarming, and the visuals for the episode match up with the tone very nicely. I also agree with Bonnie that I like how the episode takes a different approach on handling the surprise birthday trope. Although I wonder how much O'Malley might have planned this ahead of time, or if he just got extremely lucky that all of these events were happening on Snuffy's birthday. But regardless, I think this very surprisingly good episode deserves an 8 out of 10 for a very good and heartwarming episode. Episode 8, Tracy's Magic Moment. Tracy is getting ready for her race, but she wishes Savannah was here. So this episode, it's cool, it's got some good ideas and good moments. I do like the racing scene and how the shots and editing were being used. I do like the idea of Savannah being Tracy's mentor, but man, they really like to show how much of a friendship these two have. It kind of makes you wonder... Nah, that's just plain stupid. But yeah, it's kind of funny that Herkys is trying to give Tracy some encouragement, but all she wants is Savannah. So thank God that she showed up right on that countdown. Lord help Tracy if she was 1 millisecond late. And I also like the message about, even if you don't get first place, the fact that you at least worked hard to get where you're at is still impressive and just means you'll have to work harder and soon you'll get where you want to be. So, while there are some cheesy and even cringe moments in the episode, this is Tracy's best episode in the model series, so with that, I'll give it a 7 out of 10 for a very good episode.
Like I said in the first Tracy episode we reviewed, I am not a big fan of her episodes. However, this episode was the best out of the 3 Tracy-focused episodes. Like Sekoa said, the racing scene and the editing were good at best. I also agree that the scene where Herkys is trying to give some encouraging words to Tracy while she is thinking about Savannah is a bit silly. I don't have anything else to say, so while this is another episode where it's kind of predictable on what's gonna happen, it's still a fairly good episode for the most part. So yeah, I'm definitely giving this episode a half good episode rating. Episode 9, JJ and the Sparkleberry Tree. JJ and Big Jake visit Pangabula Island to see the Sparkleberry Tree, but it's not as healthy as it was before. So before we start, I just want to say that this is the best the model series has ever looked. Look at the human characters for example. They looked as if they had a huge upgrade, and the planes can now change expression smoothly too. Anyways, I like this episode. It's your typical environmental moral to always take care of the vegetation that surrounds you, otherwise it may lead to serious trouble for the environment, and this episode did a nice job in describing that moral. Although, I do feel that the scene where JJ and Big J stop at an island on their way to Pangabula was not needed, honestly. It really didn't add much to the overall story, and it brought the episode to a sudden halt. But that's just a small nitpick, and it honestly doesn't affect my enjoyment of the episode. So yep, this is another good episode.
I agree, this episode is a solid one. It's not only a message about taking care of the environment, but also just taking care of life in general. And don't take important things for granted because you never know if they'll stay with you forever, and once you realize that they're gone, it's too late now. The sets and the models for this episode are really good, and I do love that we get a different location this time instead of the airfield. Although, I'll admit, I'm kind of split on the human characters having actual pupils. I mean, I get it, but there's some moments where it looks just off to me. But anyway, as for me, I'm also going to give this episode a 7 out of 10 for a good episode. Episode 10, Tracy's Handy Hideout. Tracy and JJ are playing hide and seek while a storm is making its way over. Oh boy, so what can we say about this episode? Well, okay, to be honest, it's not the worst. It's not like it's an episode where it made either of us angry, but it didn't make us feel bored. It's basically how you think it'll go. Tracy and JJ are playing hide and seek, and Savannah's trying to find them, but JJ doesn't know where Tracy is. And wouldn't you know it, she's found before the end of the episode at the place where they're supposed to take shelter. I will say, the music for the episode was pretty good, and I like Oscar's scene with the storm. He did make the episode a little better, but even then, I'm sorry, but this is the only episode where I felt bored enough that nothing really happened. And you guys know what that means. It gets a 5 out of 10 for a meh episode. Is it that bad? No, it's harmless, but compared to the other episodes before and even after this one is easily the most forgettable one.
I agree, this episode sucks. I've never liked this episode ever since I first saw it in 2013, and that synopsis, as Sekoa mentioned, is pretty much the episode in a nutshell. In fact, the bots art for the VHS even gives away Tracy's hideout, so yeah, well done, clever bots art, for giving away Tracy's hideout. The only thing I can say that barely saved the episode from getting a bad episode rating was old Oscar reacting to the storm. He was very funny, and I loved the part where the newspaper flew into his face. Aside from that, yeah, this episode sucks, and it is definitely the worst out of the whole model era. So yep, this episode gets a very low, weak rating. Episode 11, Herkys uses his head. After Tracy is chosen to fly the Frosty Pines route, Herkys bores her with his skiing stories. This was honestly a very difficult episode to review, because I have to be honest, the plot is not that good. If you think about it, this episode feels like it has the typical 3 strikes and you're out formula all over the first and middle half of it. The part where Herkys talks endlessly about his skiing days happens twice, and while it doesn't drag on for too long, it does feel like the writers wasted time on a scene that could have been used for something more interesting. Aside from that though, we have our very first crash of the series and the only one for the entire model era, which I have to say was really well filmed. But besides that cool crash, the episode is just there, and it did feel a bit boring at times. So for that, I'm gonna have to give this episode a very low weak rating. It's not a terrible episode, and it's miles better than the previous episode we looked at, but it could have been worse.
Yeah, I agree. The plot of the episode, I wouldn't say confusing, it's just more tangled to where it feels like the writers were doing too much. It's like they wanted the reason or a setup for Herkys' accident, but they either felt like it was too short or they didn't know what should really be the main focus. Honestly, this episode feels more like a Tracy episode than a Herkys episode. The visuals were nice, and the crash was filmed nicely. I don't have too much to say. The episode itself is fine, but I do wish the setup was a bit better, but hey, it was decent enough for me to give it a 7 out of 10 for a good episode. Episode 12, Snuffy and the Snowman. Snuffy took some mushrooms and started seeing a talking snowman. So, here we are, the final episode for JJ, and it's a good one to end off the model era. Very creative. I love the look of the snow and the snowman itself. The story is simple, but a fun one nevertheless. The song is pretty catchy and, again, a simple one, but still fun. I did feel like the ending was a bit rushed, but I also like the visual clue of old Oscar in the beginning, and how the writers fit him into the story at the end, so, again, it didn't feel like it came out of nowhere, or that he was forgotten about. So, with the final episode of the model era, I'm going to give this episode an 8 out of 10 for a very good episode.
Well, I have a love-hate relationship with this episode. I love it because it's a great episode to end the model era. The plot is fantastic, it's got every character on it, a catchy song, and the visuals were pretty good for the most part. But I hate it, not really guys, if you get what I mean, because it's the last episode of the model era, and JJ will sort of never be the same after this episode. So yeah, we say farewell to the model era of JJ with a nice and solid, good episode.
So that was every episode of JJ the Jet Plane Model Era. So how did this era do in terms of the episodes and their ratings? Well, from my end, the model era had 11 good episodes, 1 meh episode, and 0 bad episodes. So the model era definitely had some pretty good episodes for its first run. I wouldn't say that they're the best or anything that special, but for a show that was inspired by Thomas while trying to be his own thing, it did pretty well for itself.
Now I counted 9 good episodes, 3 weak episodes, and no bad episodes. Not bad. The model era is still as good as I remember it to be, and while I wasn't a big fan of Tracy's episodes, this era as a whole did a very good job in starting a whole new TV show.
I agree. For what some might call a test pilot for the show, no pun intended, there are some decent episodes within these 3 VHSs, but which episodes were our favorites? Well, that's what the top 5 is for, and here are my picks for my top 5 favorite episodes. Number 5, Snuffies' Birthday Surprise. This episode is very sweet from beginning to end, and I agree with Bonnie in that I'm glad they didn't go with the typical plot you see in most birthday surprise episodes. Number 4, Snuffy and the Snowman. This episode is simple in its story, but makes up for it with the nice visuals and directing, and the snow wasn't too bad either. Number 3, Herkys' Bright Idea. Although the idea with the fireflies is silly, I do like how the writers sort of hinted at them towards the beginning that at least it didn't come out of nowhere, and the nighttime shots they got were really impressive, especially for the first VHS. Number 2, Old Oscar Leads the Parade. This episode is very sweet, and that song is what really sets it for me as being one of the best episodes in the show, with the messages we can all learn from. And number 1, JJ's Colorful Cover Up. This episode is very clever with how JJ got his blue paint, while also teaching a very big lesson about telling the truth. Otherwise, you'll get into even more trouble. And those are my top 5 episodes out of the whole 12 episodes. While I won't say these episodes are Emmy-worthy or all that special, these episodes do show off how good the show can be for the target demographic. So, I will give the show credit for at least being creative and not just being another typical kids show.
Alrighty, well, here are my top 5 episodes from the model era. Number 5, Old Oscar Steals the Show. This episode was a blast from start to finish, and Old Oscar's amazing stunt at the end was just the icing on the cake. Number 4, JJ's First Flight. An amazing pilot episode that introduces us to JJ, and I love the way that the episode handled the moral of always listening to instructions very well. Number 3, Old Oscar Leads the Parade. Sakura pretty much summed up a bit of my thoughts on his top 5, but I'd also like to add that I love that the episode added the message of always appreciating the wonders of nature around you. Number 2, Herkys' Bright Idea. It was a toss-up between this episode and JJ's Colorful Cover Up, but the more I thought about this episode, the more I felt it deserved to be on this list. Yes, the title is misleading, yes, it's more of a JJ episode than a Herky one, but to me, I think this is a great episode where we get to see JJ facing his fear of the dark, and I think Herky's idea was brilliant in a sort of way. And number 1, Snuffy's Birthday Surprise. I said it before and I'll say it again. This is a birthday surprise episode done right. While it isn't perfect, I still really enjoyed this episode, and I love the fact that Snuffy still managed to have a great day, even if he thought his friends had forgotten his birthday. Now let's go into the directing for this series, and to be fair, I don't have too much to say on this segment, so I'll keep my thoughts short. For a show that was based on Thomas, the team did a great job with the budget they had to work with. Sure, it started off rough with the first VHS tape, since the team was still trying to figure out how to distinguish themselves from the world of Thomas. But as the series went on, I felt the sets got better and better. They really went down with a bang on the last VHS tape, even if the humans can look a bit creepy for some people. Overall, the directing for this era wasn't too bad, and in my opinion, it's much better than in the CGI series that came later.
So I don't have too much to say on the directing either, but I will say that while the models may not be as impressive as that of Thomas, to be fair, even the first 2 seasons of Thomas were also simple to a fault because even Britt and David had to work with what they had at the time, and I'm sure the creators of JJ had to deal with the same problems when working on the show, and you do see the growth as the episodes continue. There's still some neat visual stuff with the animation, and there's some cool shots and points of views the team was able to get to make the set seem bigger than they probably were. So I give them a pat on the back for effort, as I'm sure it wasn't easy to film at first, and while it is a shame they ditched the models completely after the 3rd VHS, I can understand why the TLC company wanted to switch to CGI, just in case a Brit tried to sue them for being a little too similar to Thomas. Anyway, in terms of directing in the model era, it's fine, but I wouldn't say it's anything that special. So now it's time for the narration, which all the characters' voices were done by John William Gault, who most of you might know for voicing President Lyndon B. Johnson in the 1994 movie Forrest Gump, and he does a decent job as a narrator for the show. I do like how he tries to give each plane their own voices, and most of the characters he voices really works well to suit their personality. Like giving Jake a big gruff voice to make him sound a little scary, but deep down he's got a big heart, and has some wise moments he shares with JJ, to having old Oscar sound like your crazy grandpa that you still look forward to visiting whenever you can. The only voice he gives I think is a little weak is his voice for Tracy. She kinda sounds a little too similar to JJ's, but I won't be too harsh on him because he does a solid job in the end. It is a shame that these 3 VHSs are his only appearance on the show, but for the time he was featured, I could say the team picked a good choice for their first narrator. I have no complaints with John, so good job, John, and may you rest in peace.
Mr. John William Gault. I'll be honest, I think he's a superb narrator for the show. He's got a similar tone to George Carlin in a sort of way, and I really like that a lot. While I don't think he's up to par with narrators such as Carlin himself and even Michael Angelis, he still did a damn good job with the role and he really made it his own. With the exception of Tracy, the character voices he did were I think the highlight of his performance. JJ, Herky, Snuffy, Big Jake, and saving the best one for last, Old Oscar, were the voices that I think he did best. So with that, I can conclude that John William Gault did a tremendous job in the narrator seat, and it's a shame that we never hear from him again after this era. May he rest in peace. Okay then, now the big question that everyone wants to know. Was the model era of JJ good? I'm happy to say that yes, indeed it was. There might have been a couple of weak episodes here and there, but I can see the potential that this series had. It's a shame that the model era was very short-lived, because I would have loved to see some more episodes produced in this form.
As for me, this has been an interesting journey watching something that I've seen from childhood, but looking at a completely different era I never knew about. Again, while I won't say this is the best show or all that grand, this wasn't as bad as I thought it might be, and I'm glad I at least had some stuff I wanted to say about the show and the episodes we did watch. Each had something memorable about them. Even if not all the episodes were a grand hit, they still left some impression on me that I can see why the show would eventually get picked up for television. And I can see how some kids enjoy the pilot episodes. Barney does make a good point in that the show does have a couple of similarities to Thomas, and that the stories are simple, but it's how they write and direct each story that makes them stand out. While I don't see myself watching the show all the time, I'm glad to say that the model era had some good moments for me to give the whole pilot a 7 out of 10 for a good season. Or, good pilot, I guess I should call it. For those of our JJ fans, and even Thomas fans, we recommend giving this series a watch. Then hey, with the new CGI reboot coming out soon, that will probably be a good time to rewatch the episodes and see what the new show might have to offer. Well, that'll do it for this video, and hey, look at that, we actually reviewed another show that's not Thomas for once. Hopefully you guys also enjoyed the new video as much as we did. Now, depending on how well this video does, if you guys also want us to tackle the original CGI series, let us know down in the comments. But we will admit, it might be a little tough getting all the episodes, as there's a couple we could view for free. So, if we ever do decide to get to the CGI series, it might take a while.
Yeah, unfortunately, some of the CGI era episodes are only available on a Christian streaming service called Yippee that require us to pay to view the episodes. But we'll see what we can do with the CGI series, as I'm open to reviewing that era as well.
Anyways, like always, if you guys enjoyed this video, hit the like button and hit subscribe for more videos coming soon onto this channel.
Also, don't forget to check out our separate channels, both of which will be linked in the description below. And with that, this has been Old Teapot 7 here with
Sakura the Diesel.
saying thank you for watching, and we'll be seeing you guys real soon.